Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Undersecretary DiCarlo, for your remarks. Colleagues, nearly 3 years ago, Russia appalled the world with its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Putin wanted to topple Ukraine's democratically elected government. Since then, Russia has violated the UN Charter, multiple resolutions of this Council, the Geneva Conventions, humanitarian international law, and Putin has showed the world he has no respect for obligations under international law. In more than 1,000 days of this reckless war of choice, Putin has failed to achieve any of his goals in Ukraine. Instead, he has left Russia's power and influence greatly diminished. 700,000 Russian soldiers dead or injured, and more than 1 million total casualties. Meanwhile, Ukraine remains strong and defiant as a free and sovereign democracy. The United States and our many global partners continue to stand with Ukraine and with Ukraine's troops, who have fought with resilience and strength. With global help, Ukraine has held off the second largest military in the world, while Russia suffers 1,500 casualties per day. Ukraine has fought brilliantly, even as China, the second largest economy in the world, has backed Putin, as Iran, the biggest state sponsor of terror, has armed Russia with drones and missiles, and as North Korea, the most notorious nuclear-armed rogue state in the world, has supplied Russia with some 11,000 troops, missiles, and countless crates of ammunition and munitions. Ukraine has defied all of them because they fight for their freedom, their country, their families, and their identity. Mr. President, as we discuss how to achieve peace, we must remember why Ukraine fights back. Russia has killed more than 12,000 Ukrainian civilians and wounded another 27,000. Russia's forces have systematically attacked Ukraine's energy infrastructure, weaponizing winter by leaving thousands of households without power. Russia's forces have abducted Ukrainian children and tried to erase their identities. So long as Russia's forces occupy Ukraine and threaten Ukrainian families, Ukrainians will not have peace. And yet, China insists Ukrainians should accept the reality of their occupation for the sake of peace. Colleagues, for the sake of peace, we allowed Russia to hold 20% of Georgia. For the sake of peace, we allowed Russia to occupy Crimea. And now, for the sake of peace, some countries call on Ukraine to meet Russia halfway. We all want peace, but an outcome that rewards Putin for Russia's aggression is no peace at all. Appeasement will lead to more war. We will only have peace in Ukraine when Russia leaves Ukraine, and when the UN Charter and international law are respected and protected. We will have peace when Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are guaranteed. We will have peace when Ukrainian families feel safe and don't need to fight. For that reason, as the victim of Russia's aggression, Ukraine must play a leading role in determining its future. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. This principle is paramount. While Russia persists in Ukraine, the United States and our partner will use all the tools at our disposal to thwart Putin's imperialist ambitions, and we will help Ukraine defend itself until we achieve a comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace for Ukraine. We urge all member states to continue to condemn Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and to demand Russia withdraw its forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. Regrettably, one country on this council has never condemned Russia's invasion or its violation of Security Council resolutions and the UN Charter. Instead, it has given Putin its support. Beijing claims it has strict export controls in place for its dual-use exports, and yet China continues to support Russia's defense industrial base with those exports. China's exports directly fuel Russia's war against Ukraine and its attacks against civilian infrastructure. This support makes China the decisive enabler of Russia's war. On the other hand, Group of Seven leaders have acted in lockstep to immobilize Russian assets, and the United States further sanctioned some of Russia's largest banks. Europe cut its reliance on Russian gas. Consequently, Russia's inflation is at 9%, Interest rates are at 21%. Russia has burned through much of its reserve funds. 1 million Russians have fled Russia, and the Kremlin can no longer produce enough material to replenish its war capabilities. If China had worked with global leaders and cut off Russia's ability to make war instead of fueling it, this war would be over. But the United States will continue to stand with the more than 100 countries who do condemn Putin's aggression and to call on Putin to get out of Ukraine. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement.
Mr. President, I will have to break the string of dull anti-Russian mantras by the Western members of the Council. And we, after all, are here to listen to them and to check off this issue and to maintain somehow the illusion that the Ukrainian issue remains in the focus of the Security Council. In reality, the Ukrainian issue today comes down to only a few points to which, indeed, I would like to draw the attention of colleagues, especially since these are the points so that the Western colleagues didn't say a word about. So, during the time that elapsed since the last meeting, the Ukrainian armed forces situation on the battlefield has worsened. According to the Ukrainian side, over the recent 10 days alone, the Russian army liberated 8 villages, including a very important stronghold in Kurahovo. The Eastern Front was also broken in several other places. Several hundred Ukrainian and foreign mercenaries were surrounded and taken prisoners, and hundreds of pieces of military equipment were destroyed. Such large towns as Pokrovsk, which is going to become Krasnoarmeysk, and Toretsk and Chasov Yar are on the brink of falling. In some areas, the Russian forces basically reached the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Ukrainians are increasingly reluctant to fight for the corrupt Zelensky clique and the political interests. The data on the number of deserters were already voiced in this chamber. According to the Ukrainian Land Command, they are searching for more than 500,000 people who are accused of avoiding mobilization. The President's office is, of course, trying to hide the scope of these developments. Nonetheless, periodically, mass media do give us information which shows us the real picture. For example, at the beginning of the year, reporters talked about the investigation in Ukraine on the charges of desertion against a brigade which was equipped and trained in France. It's number 155, Kiev. 1,700 military in that brigade out of 2,300 deserted soon after they were sent to the front. And this is an elite unit we're talking about. So what do you think is happening to the people who are caught in the street and then used as cannon fodder? It is not surprised that people use the earliest opportunity to surrender, and the main danger for them are the prevention unit of Ukrainian nationalists who are shooting those who try to retreat in the back. This situation is something that the Washington puppeteers of that regime are not happy with. They're worried that their investment into anti-Russia project and the weaponry they supplied could turn out to be useless, and the Kiev regime is going to collapse, similarly to what happened in 2021 when the pro-American regime in Afghanistan collapsed. They are not paying attention to the outcry of those who do not want to be sent to the senseless meat grinder, and they are today insisting that the expired Ukrainian stage act reduce the age of conscription there from 25 to 18. And they ignore what's doing that, the expert opinion, who say that many people in that age bracket have already left Ukraine, and it will not be possible to obtain the needed number of those who are willing to die using that measure. Former actor Zelensky is trying to show to his masters that his regime is still capable of fighting. He's ignoring the continued collapse of the Eastern Front, and he's throwing all of into the Kursk Oblast, where the Ukrainian forces are suffering daily losses, but are still controlling less than 1/3 of the territory they captured in August. Recently, he undertook yet another failed attempt of counteroffensive there, but the Ukrainian armed forces were pushed back and they lost thousands of soldiers and hundreds of units of equipment. So what is left for the leader of the Kiev junta in this situation? Well, he's trying to attempt media victories and using drones and Western long-range missiles for attacks against Russian territory. Their effectiveness is close to zero, but there's some damage done by the wreckage. Furthermore, there are continued shellings of the peaceful Russian territories. Civilians are dying there. For example, in the beginning of the year, as a result of a targeted and deliberate strike by Ukrainian drones, the Donetsk-Orlovka highway, a freelance correspondent for Izvestia, Alexander Matemyanov, was killed, and other Russian reporters were wounded. Donetsk and Belgorodsk Oblast are being shelled regularly. The Ukrainian artillery cannot reach there, so they're using missile systems. A special case in this range is what happened on the 11th of January. It was an attack against a compressor station of the Turkish Stream gas pipeline in Krasnodar. Let me recall here that the day before, the president of Ukraine declined to extend the contract for sending the natural gas into Europe via Ukraine, and thus made a step towards further undermining the economic potential of the old continent. We have every reason to think that the attack against the Turkish Stream infrastructure was conducted at the prompting of Washington and London, as they are interested in switching the EU countries onto the LNG from the United States. These are the same countries who are impeding an international investigation of an act of terror against Nord Stream in September 2022, and you can draw your own obvious conclusions here. Mr. President, the desire of the sponsors of the Kiev regime to save their collapsing anti-Russia project still outweighs any sensible thoughts about the need to look for a peaceful solution to the conflict, moving its root causes. Whilst this is being actively voiced, increasingly actively by some Western politicians, but the rhetoric of the United States and satellites here has changed considerably recently. Initially, they were talking about the need to ensure that Ukraine is victorious. Then they moved on to supporting the Kiev regime as long as it takes. Then that Russia should not be allowed to be victorious. And today, the idea is to ensure that the Ukrainian sinking ship has a strong negotiating position. And this makes the Ukrainian actor nervous. Its entourage is talking about having a large-scale tragedy which could bring back to Ukraine the support of the Western public, a high-impact provocation similar to Bucha, which was the reason in April 2022 he managed, together with the British, to sabotage the essentially agreed Russia-Ukrainian peace agreements. Zelensky usurper is being made nervous not by the obviously inevitable defeat in Ukraine, he couldn't care less about that, but the danger of having fresh elections and the fact that the US government could audit the assistance to Ukraine, as it will show the scope of the corruption in his country is covering up. And that is why recently he's trying to provoke Russia by striking against various facilities in our territory and trying to trigger a large-scale reaction from us. But he will be disappointed because Russia continues not reacting to the provocations and continues striking only those facilities which have anything to do with the military potential of Ukraine. There are tragedies having to do with the fact that the debris are falling down, debris from drones and air defense, as we've already stated, in residential areas in violation of IHL. But these tragedies are not sufficient for what is needed by the Kiev ringleader. There are rumors in Kiev that the regime, together with the UK sponsors, is preparing a large-scale provocation for which Russia will be blamed. Given this, there is a very popular online slogan in Ukraine. It sounds as follows: "Flee Ukraine before it's too late." And Ukrainians are leaving the Zelensky concentration camp. This is what the country is being called now after the former comedian has cancelled any elections. Potential soldiers are fleeing the training grounds in Western countries. Politicians are leaving. Supreme Rada members are fleeing. Supreme Court justices, diplomats, and athletes are leaving the country. In the beginning of the year, the Ukrainian mass media reported that the deputy security chief of Ukraine, Alexander Poklad, fled abroad. The former head of the Forensic Research Institution, Mr. Ruvin, and the former head of financial monitoring, Igor Cherkassky, they all fled. Today, Mr. Carlo told us about torture supposedly taking place against Ukrainian military on the basis of the information which is being provided by the various entities, various commissions, using the Western and Ukrainian propaganda machine. Well, please listen to what was being said by the Mr. Artyom Dmitruk, a Rada deputy, about the torture he underwent when people tortured him, trying to get evidence from him and admissions of high treason. His main fault was he spoke in defense of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So let me quote some of the horrifying things he mentioned. I quote, "I was pushed against a cold and wet floor. I heard the screams and moans of my friends nearby. A little bit further away, the screams and moans of other people and the horrid sounds of torture. I was beaten severely. My eyes were almost gouged out. I lost consciousness. I fell off the chair. I came to, and I was tortured again." End of quote. They threatened to execute him or maim him. After that, he was moved into the Odessa branch of Ukrainian security, and there they made to speak in front of the camera and pledge that he will never again criticize Vladimir Zelensky or the head of his office, Andrei Yermak. In addition to that, they tried to make him into a Ukrainian security agent so as to fight the opposition. Mr. Dmitruk is not the only politician who told us that there are Ukrainian security concentration camps in Kiev. We also heard about that earlier from another Rada member, Mr. Alexander Dubinsky. According to what he said, more than 300 people were put through that camp. They were tortured so to obtain evidence against the president-elect Donald Trump so as to use this evidence in the election campaign in the United States. It's a very interesting confessions, wouldn't you say? They show you what the American journalist Gonzalo Lira had to go through. He was arrested in August 2023 and tortured to death. He died in the Ukrainian security prison about a year ago, on the 12th of January 2024. And this was also the experience of 70-year-old human rights advocate Berezhnaya. She was sentenced after months of torture by Ukrainian security. She was sentenced to 14 years of prison for speaking at the UN about human rights violations by the Kiev regime. And I'm not even mentioning the torture that the Russian servicemen and POWs are indeed undergoing in Ukrainian prisons. So let me put the following rhetorical question to Western colleagues. How does this all correlate with the narrative you're pushing about the heyday of democracy in Ukraine? We never had illusions about that. We've always known what was happening in that country since the anti-constitutional coup in 2014, which was supported by the United States and their satellites. Unlike you, we can tell the truth. We don't have to be hypocritical, contrary to what is being done, for example, by our British colleagues. At their informal ARIA formula meeting on the 13th of January, they brought into New York someone who were open Ukrainian Nazis. One of them has a tattoo of the German Totenkopf division, which was convicted in the UK for murdering W's in 1940. Mr. President, I would like to conclude by quoting what was said by the nominee to become the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, yesterday at the hearings in the Senate. He said that the problem of Ukraine is not that they're running out of money. The problem of Ukraine is that they're running out of Ukrainians. And let me add to that and say that the problem here is that the people in Ukraine do not vote to fight for the person who usurped the power in the country and turned into a concentration camp. And the sooner our Western colleagues realize this, the better for them and for the Ukrainian citizens themselves. I thank you.